All right, welcome everybody. So I'm going to do a little screen capture program here to go a little bit into aggregate supply and demand for you a little bit more in depth, and then I'm going to post up another video for you over the material that's going to come up in the AP exam review, the live review they have for you tonight at 5 o'clock, which is going to be over fiscal and monetary policy actions in the short run, which is pretty simple, or not simple, depending on how you feel about it. So what I want to start with is look at this little slide about the Super Bowl. So why do cities want the Super Bowl? Well, the reason why is because it causes something called a spending chain. Now, a spending chain is what happens when Super Bowl comes to a town, and two big teams are playing there. It's this big game. Spending explodes in the city or in the area around it. Like people are buying jerseys and other things, and just everything related to the Super Bowl and what's going on. But they're also buying other things, not just the sports-related stuff. They're buying food, drinks, beer, beverages, party stuff. And it causes off the spending chain. So see right here, you see Bobby spends $100 on Jason's product. Jason now has more income, so he buys $100 on Nancy's product. And it creates this chain reaction called the multiplier effect, and shows how spending is magnified in the economy. And we can see it in this little formula right here. So it's broken down into two different formulas. So we have the marginal propensity to consume, so how much people consume rather than save when there is an exchange in income. It is always expressed as a fraction or a decimal. So we got the marginal propensity to consume right here. So you put the change in consumer spending. So on top you put how much they spend. So like here for this example right here, number one, so if you received $100 and spent $50, so we would put the $50 on top here, the spent money, and then $100 would be our income at the bottom. And then you divide that, and of course you'd get MPC would equal 2. So that would be marginal propensity to consume. And on the other side of it, we have marginal propensity to save, or the MPS. So how much people save rather than consume when there is a change in income, which comes up in a fraction. So right here, so we put change in saving, and change in income on the bottom. So if you received $100, so $100 would go on the bottom, and then save $50 would be on the top. And so it would, you could simplify that fraction down, and you'd get 1/2. So you'd get a fraction of 1/2 as your MPS. So that's MPC and MPS. And right now we're looking at very large scale macro spending. We're moving away from small, looking at one product like a burrito for supply and demand. We're looking at very large scale purchases and spending and saving, and like in the size of like a city, which is why they used the Super Bowl as an example. So right. So right, we're going to move on and look at aggregate demand. We've already touched on this. So when you use aggregates, we combine all prices in all quantities. So we already wrote down the term for aggregate demand, but if you need some review, it's all the goods and services, the real GDP that buyers are willing and able to purchase at different price levels. So there is an inverse relationship between price level and real GDP. Just like there's an inverse relationship between the y-axis and the x-axis on the demand curve. So remember on a graph, if I could draw it on here, I can't. On a graph, so demand goes to the dirt. So it starts at the top left corner, and then it goes down to the top, onto the bottom right corner. So top left to the bottom right. You can see right here on my mouse it would start up here and then go down like this. And that would be your aggregate demand. So here you get increases in inflation, then real GDP demand falls, and we'll see how that looks in the graph. So this is simple demand. So there's a demand for one product for one person, but when we're looking at aggregate demand, we're looking at several transactions happening at once or over a duration of time. So right, and then you get a review. This is all stuff you should know pretty well by now. So here we go, the aggregate demand curve. So demand to the dirt. So this is how the graph will look. So you'll have the price level on the left right here, and the real domestic product down on the bottom. So aggregate demand, or AD, is the demand by consumers, businesses, government, and foreign countries. And changes in price level cause a move along the curve, not a shift of the curve. So it'll cause a slide down or up the curve if there's a change in price level. Okay? And by the way, you can pause this video at any time to take a minute to understand what I'm talking about, or you can go backward if you need to at any time. All right. So of course we have different effects that play out on the aggregate demand curve. So shows the output of goods and services, the real GDP demanded at different price levels. So the aggregate demand curve slopes down due to wealth effect, the interest rate effect, and export effect. So what are those? So the wealth effect, 3 reasons why it does this. So wealth effect, higher prices reduce purchasing power of money. So if prices go up, not all people have the an enormous amount of purchasing power. So the more prices go up, the less there's going to be of aggregate demand. The less overall there's going to be of people spending money on a particular product or just products in general in the economy. So this decreases the quantity of expenditures. So lower price levels increase purchasing power. So which is the other side of it. So if higher prices reduce purchasing power, then lower prices would increase purchasing power and increase expenditures. So right, so you got an example here. So if the balance in your bank was $50,000, but inflation erodes your purchasing power, you will likely reduce your spending. So price level goes up and GDP demanded goes down. So right, if we were to look at this on here, so price level would go up and real domestic product and expenditures. So if we increased the price level of whatever we're looking at the overall price level of several different products in the economy, we would have right here, if I could draw a line, just imagine I'm drawing an imaginary line with my cursor. The real GDP, or the expenditures, which is what this would signify down here, would move to the left. So it would be a slide along, and we'd have a decrease in expenditures, or real domestic output. So there'd be less money going around because the price level went up and people had less purchasing power and spent less. So that is the wealth effect. Interest rate effect. So as price levels increase, lenders need to charge higher interest rates to get a real return on their loans. So higher interest rates discourage consumer spending and business investment. But businesses are generally still taking out loans. So to make their money's worth, they are charging higher interest rates on their loans. So remember, interest rate is like a price on loaning or borrowing money. That's essentially what it is. So like when you borrow money, you'll have an interest rate on it, which is a percentage. It's like a percentage of the amount you borrowed. So like say you borrowed $100 and there was a 50% interest rate, you would have to pay the $100 plus $50 because it was a 50% interest rate. So you would have to pay half of the $100, which is not too bad. $100 is not too much money, so it's not a bad deal. Now, if it was up in the tens of thousands, you'd have a problem. But anyway, going back to this, so higher interest rate effect. So an increase in prices leads to an increase in the interest rate. So if you increase the price level, it's going to cause an interest rate effect. So the banks are going to increase the interest rate, and this is also going to. So let's say you had a question that asked banks raise interest rates on borrowers. So what's this going to do? This is going to raise the price level and decrease expenditures. All right. So you can see here in a graph that when the interest rates, when inflation rises, interest rates also go up with it, because when hard times fall on business, they have hard times paying back loans. So for banks to protect themselves, they'll have higher interest rates. So as you see, as inflation increases, so does the interest rate. Foreign trade effect. So when U.S. price level rises, foreign buyers purchase fewer U.S. goods and Americans buy more foreign goods. So that means Americans are buying less of American-produced products, and this decreases expenditure in the the United States GDP. So if they're increasing price level, so if there's a lot of foreign trade going on, then this is going to increase price levels and decrease expenditure. I'm kind of limited in time here. I'm using this program that only limits me to 15-minute videos, so we're at 12 minutes now, so I'm trying to speed it up a little bit. So these are the shifters, if you'd like to take these down in your notes, for aggregate demand. So these are things that can cause it to either shift to the right, or left. So changes in expectations, wealth, firm capacity, and government policies. And we'll hopefully have more time to talk about this in class, in person. But if it comes to it, I'll have a time where we talk about aggregate demand shifters over this. All right, let's look at aggregate supply very quickly. All right, so aggregate supply, the amount of goods and services, real GDP, that firms produce in an economy at different price levels. So this is what firms produce. So aggregate supply difference between short run and long run, and has two different curves. So we have short run aggregate supply, so wages and resource prices will not increase as price levels increase. So this is what makes short run distinct. They will not increase as price levels increase. Whereas long-run aggregate supply, wages and resource prices will increase as price levels increase. So just like the last part, so this is just regular supply, and like aggregate demand, aggregate supply is a very large, so we're looking at several different firms that are producing and supplying things all at once. So short-run aggregate supply. So in the short run, wages and resource prices will not increase as price levels increase. So in the short run, firms aren't too worried immediately. But in the long term, prices will begin to rise very slowly. So, and we're almost out of time. But so aggregate supply curve, it goes to the sky. And it's is the production of all the firms in the economy, and it has, so you have price level and real domestic output, like so. A good way of remembering the shifters is IRAP, IRAP. They are change in inflationary expectations, resource prices, actions in government, productivity,